Have you ever been absolutely certain about something, only to later discover that reality seems to insist otherwise, not as a vague doubt or a small misunderstanding, but as a crystal clear memory that you would have sworn was part of your life experience, so vivid and so stable in your mind that it feels impossible to question? And yet when you look for proof, the world tells you it never happened that way at all, leaving you in a strange position where your own memory feels more reliable than external reality itself. And even more unsettling than that, what if you found out that thousands of other people share the exact same memory as you, down to specific details, emotions, and certainty, as if an entire group of minds synchronized around something that officially never existed? How could that possibly happen? How could so many people, with different lives, different backgrounds, and different experiences, all converge on the same identical false memory without any coordination or communication? And this is exactly where things begin to feel unusual, because you might remember a famous logo a certain way, or a movie line delivered in a specific phrasing, or even a childhood book title spelled differently than it is today. And yet when you check the official records, everything appears subtly or dramatically changed, raising a question that cannot be easily dismissed, which is not whether you are mistaken, but how it is possible for so many people to be mistaken in the exact same way, with such consistency across time and geography. And this phenomenon has been labeled the Mandela Effect, named after the strange shared memory where thousands of people were convinced that Nelson Mandela had died in prison in the 1980s, even though in reality he lived for decades afterward and became the president of South Africa. And this single example alone opens the door to a much deeper curiosity about how human memory works and whether it is truly reliable or something far more fluid and reconstructive than most people realize. Because once you start examining this idea closely, you begin to notice that it is not just one isolated case, but rather a repeating pattern across multiple domains of culture, entertainment, branding, and even historical recollection. And as you reflect on your own memories of childhood, media, and everyday experiences, you are forced to ask yourself how many of those memories are actually precise recordings, and how many are reconstructions that your brain has quietly adjusted over time without you ever noticing. Because memory is not a camera that stores exact footage, but instead behaves more like a reconstruction system that rebuilds events every time you recall them. Meaning that each act of remembering is not playback, but recreation. And in that recreation, small gaps are filled, assumptions are inserted, and details are adjusted until the memory feels complete again. This means that over long periods of time, even confident memories can shift into something slightly different from what originally happened. And while this explains individual errors, it becomes far more complex when we realize that the Mandela Effect involves collective agreement on the same inaccuracies, which suggests that something more than simple forgetfulness is at play. Because when thousands or even millions of people independently share the same incorrect memory, across different cultures and without coordination, it raises the possibility that suggestion, repetition, and shared media exposure might be subtly aligning people's recollections into similar patterns, especially when certain versions of reality become widely repeated and socially reinforced until the brain begins to accept them as familiar truth. Yet even this explanation feels incomplete when people report a strange emotional resistance upon discovering the official version, as if the correction does not feel like learning something new, but instead feels like losing something familiar, almost as if reality itself has been slightly edited without permission. And this emotional reaction is one of the reasons the Mandela Effect feels so compelling, because it is not just intellectual confusion, but experiential discomfort. And when you examine specific examples, such as widely known book titles, famous movie quotes, or global brand logos that people remember differently, you start to see how deeply these memories are embedded in cultural experience, making it difficult for individuals to accept that they could all be wrong in the same way. And this is where the tension between memory and documented reality becomes psychologically powerful, because human confidence in memory is often mistaken for accuracy, even though confidence is simply the feeling of familiarity rather than proof of correctness. And the brain naturally prefers coherent stories over fragmented uncertainty, which means that when gaps appear in memory, the mind automatically fills them in with the most logical or emotionally consistent version, gradually shaping a narrative that feels completely real, even if it is not fully accurate. And when this process is multiplied across millions of individuals exposed to similar cultural inputs, it becomes easier to understand how shared false memories could form without any need for supernatural explanations. Although, the sensation of something deeper remains strong for many people, because certain Mandela Effect examples feel unusually stable across populations, almost as if they were anchored in collective experience. And this leads some to speculate about more extreme possibilities, such as overlapping realities or parallel timelines, where different versions of events coexist and occasionally bleed into one another, creating moments where people remember fragments from alternate versions of history, a concept that sounds like science fiction, yet becomes emotionally intriguing when enough consistent examples appear to challenge simple explanations. Because if reality is fixed and memory is flawed, why do so many independent individuals converge on the same alternate version with such precision? And why do these memories feel so consistent in structure and detail? And even skeptics who reject the idea of alternate realities often acknowledge that the pattern itself is real, even if the interpretation is not. Because the Mandela Effect reveals something undeniable about human perception, which is that the brain is constantly reconstructing reality rather than passively recording it, filtering sensory input through prediction, expectation, and prior knowledge. And most of the time, this system works flawlessly enough to navigate daily life, but occasionally it produces distortions that spread socially and become reinforced through repetition until they feel like shared truth. And when these distortions are later challenged by factual evidence, the mind does not simply accept correction easily, because memory is tied to identity and personal experience, meaning that contradicting a memory can feel like contradicting part of oneself, which is why people often respond with disbelief or frustration when confronted with evidence that conflicts with what they clearly remember. And as more examples of these inconsistencies are discovered, the phenomenon begins to feel less like isolated mistakes and more like a structural feature of human cognition itself, revealing that perception is not stable, but continuously rewritten in subtle ways that are usually invisible to the person experiencing it. And once you become aware of this process, it becomes difficult not to question other areas of certainty in your life, because if something as fundamental as memory can shift without awareness, then the boundary between what is real and what is remembered becomes less absolute than most people assume. And perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Mandela Effect is not whether reality has changed or whether memory is unreliable, but the realization that your mind is constantly constructing a version of reality that feels complete and consistent, even when it is not perfectly aligned with external truth, meaning that what you experience as certainty may actually be a continuously updated interpretation, rather than an exact reflection of what truly happened. And once this idea takes hold, it creates a lasting curiosity about how many other assumptions in daily life are built on reconstructed memory rather than fixed fact, leaving behind a final question that lingers beyond all explanations, which is how much of your understanding of the past is truly yours, and how much of it has been silently rewritten by time, suggestion, and perception itself, without you ever noticing it happening.